For 3 years, my family thought I was losing my mind. Every time I mentioned my job, they'd exchange those looks, the eye rolls, the whispered conversations when they thought I couldn't hear. Diane's living in some fantasy again, they'd say. My own mother started suggesting therapy. My brother openly called me delusional at Thanksgiving dinner. But last Tuesday, when two Navy SEALs showed up at our family barbecue asking for me by my classified call sign, everything changed.
I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The whole thing started when I moved back to Cedar Falls, Iowa after college. Fresh out of Northwestern with a degree in linguistics, I thought I'd take a gap year to figure out my next move. What I didn't expect was to get recruited 3 weeks later by a man in a gray suit who approached me at the local Starbucks. "Diane Catherine Morrison?" he asked, sliding into the seat across from me. I nodded, closing my laptop. He knew my middle name, which wasn't exactly public information. "Agent Marcus Caldwell, Department of Defense. We've been following your academic work." He placed a business card on the table. Plain white, just a name and phone number. No fancy government seal or anything you'd see in movies. "My academic work?" I laughed. "I wrote papers on dead languages. Etruscan syntax isn't exactly groundbreaking stuff." "Actually, it is, especially when combined with your proficiency in Arabic, Mandarin, and Farsi, plus that little side project you did on cryptographic patterns in historical texts." He leaned forward. "We need someone with your specific skill set." That conversation led to a series of interviews in a nondescript office building in downtown Chicago, polygraph tests, background checks that went back to my kindergarten teacher, medical evaluations, psychological assessments. The whole process took 6 months, during which I couldn't tell anyone what I was doing. "Where are you going 3 days a week?" my mom, Patricia, kept asking. "You're being so secretive, honey. It's not like you." I'd make up excuses: job interviews, freelance translation work, visiting friends in the city. Each lie made the next one easier, but also made me feel more isolated from my family. My younger brother Jake was the worst about it. He'd moved back home after his divorce and was working at the local hardware store, bitter about how his life had turned out. Seeing me be mysterious about some supposed big opportunity just made him more resentful. "Let me guess," he'd say when I'd return from Chicago. "Another top-secret interview with Google? Sure, Diane. I'm sure they're dying to hire someone to translate ancient Roman graffiti." The day I finally got my clearance was anticlimactic. Agent Caldwell called me at 7 a.m. on a Thursday. "You're in. Report to Building 847 on Monday. Ask for Dr. Sarah Chen. And Diane, congratulations. Your country thanks you." Building 847 turned out to be a facility I'd driven past 100 times growing up, thinking it was just some boring government agricultural research center, the kind of place that tested corn hybrids and soil samples. Turns out, that was exactly what they wanted people to think. My first day, Dr. Chen walked me through a maze of corridors that went deeper underground than should have been possible for a building in Iowa. We passed laboratories with equipment I didn't recognize, offices with no names on the doors, and security checkpoints every 50 yards. "Your job," Dr. Chen explained as we settled in her office 3 floors below ground level, "is to analyze intercepted communications from hostile foreign entities, specifically communications that use historical linguistic patterns to hide modern intelligence." She handed me a folder marked with classifications I'd only seen in movies. Inside were transcripts of radio communications, encrypted messages, and what looked like ancient poetry. This came from a cell operating in Eastern Europe. They're using modified classical Latin to discuss weapons transfers. We need to know what they're really saying. Looking at those documents, I felt something click. This wasn't just translation work. This was puzzle solving on a level I'd never imagined. Every sentence was a riddle. Every word choice was deliberate. These people were using my specialty, dead languages, to hide very much alive threats. "How often do cases like this come up?" I asked. Dr. Chen smiled grimly. "More than you'd think. Terrorist cells have figured out that using historical languages and codes throws off most automated surveillance systems. They'll embed operational details in what looks like academic discussions about medieval literature or hide weapon specifications in fake archaeological reports. My workstation was in a windowless room with two other analysts, both significantly older than me. Margaret Sullivan had been doing this kind of work for 15 years and specialized in Slavic languages. Robert Hayes focused on Middle Eastern dialects and had apparently been with the agency since before I was born. The work was fascinating but isolating. I couldn't talk about it with anyone, not just because of security protocols, but because it was genuinely impossible to explain without sounding completely insane. How do you tell your family that you spend your days decoding terrorist communications hidden in fake Latin poetry? That you've identified weapon smuggling operations by recognizing that someone was using the wrong declension patterns for classical Latin verbs? That your ability to spot anachronisms in supposedly ancient texts was now a matter of national security? I tried to give them hints without breaking my oath. I'd mention working for a government contractor. I'd talk about doing translation work for federal agencies. I'd be as vague as possible while still trying to convey that my job was legitimate and important. It didn't work. Government contractor, my dad, Michael, would repeat skeptically. Doing what, exactly? Translation services, document analysis, I can't be too specific. Can't be too specific, right? Because your super important job translating parking tickets is classified? The real problem started about 6 months in, when my work began requiring travel. Not the exotic international assignments you might imagine, but trips to FBI field offices in cities like Cleveland and Phoenix, where I'd spend a week analyzing evidence and briefing agents on what intercepted communications actually meant. These trips were always last minute, and I could never give my family advance warning. I'd get a call from Dr. Chen on Sunday night telling me to catch a 6 a.m. flight to Denver, where I'd spend the week in a federal building helping crack a case involving coded messages hidden in online forum discussions about ancient Roman military tactics. "Where are you going now?" my mom would ask as I threw clothes into a suitcase at 5 a.m. "Work trip. I'll call you when I get there." What kind of work requires you to leave town with 4 hours' notice? I couldn't answer that. The truth was that criminal organizations don't operate on a 9-to-5 schedule, and when they're communicating in codes based on historical languages, there's a very short list of people qualified to decode them quickly. But to my family, my behavior looked erratic and suspicious. I'd disappear for weeks at a time, come back exhausted and unable to talk about where I'd been, then spend days catching up on sleep and being mysteriously unavailable for family events. My nephew's birthday party was the first major incident. I'd been in Phoenix for 2 weeks, working on a case involving a group that was using modified biblical Aramaic to coordinate drug trafficking operations. I got back to Cedar Falls the night before the party, completely drained, and suffering from what I can only describe as linguistic fatigue. You try spending 14-hour days parsing ancient Semitic grammar patterns and see how coherent you are afterward. At the party, I was quiet and distracted. When people asked about my job, I gave my usual vague answers about government contracting work. My cousin Lisa, who works in HR for an insurance company, started asking detailed questions about benefits and office locations. "Which department are you with?" she pressed. "I have a friend who works for the Department of Agriculture. Maybe she knows your supervisor." I deflected as best I could, but I could see the doubt creeping into everyone's faces. My answers were too vague, too evasive. I looked like someone who was lying about having a job at all. That's when Jake decided to stage what he probably thought was an intervention. "Come on, Diane," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Just tell us the truth. Are you working for the CIA or something?" He said it as a joke, but the way everyone laughed made it clear they thought the real joke was the idea that I could be trusted with anything more important than organizing church bake sales. "Right," my Aunt Carol chimed in. "Diane, international woman of mystery. I bet she's out there stopping foreign spies with her knowledge of Latin verbs." More laughter. I felt my face burning, but I couldn't defend myself without potentially compromising operational security, so I just sat there and let my own family mock me for having exactly the kind of job they were joking about. That was the beginning of what my family now refers to as my weird phase.
The more secretive I became about work, the more convinced they became that I was either lying about having a job or was involved in something embarrassing that I didn't want to admit. My mom started leaving articles about job search strategies on my bed. My dad made pointed comments about getting serious about your career whenever I mentioned being tired from work. Jake openly told people that I was probably working at a call center and was too proud to admit it. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The worst part was that I was actually doing the most important and challenging work of my life. I'd helped identify 3 major terrorist cells in 6 months. My analysis had contributed to preventing what could have been significant attacks on civilian targets. I was getting commendations from federal agencies I couldn't name, and working cases that made international news, even though my role would never be publicly acknowledged. But to my family, I was just their weird daughter's sister who'd moved back to small-town Iowa and was making up stories about having some mysterious, important job. The breaking point came at Thanksgiving. My extended family was gathered at my parents' house, and somehow the conversation turned to everyone sharing what they were thankful for in their careers. My cousins talked about promotions and new clients. My uncles discussed their businesses. When it came to me, I tried to keep it general. I'm grateful to be doing work that feels meaningful, I said, something where I feel like I'm making a real difference. Jake snorted. Making a difference at what? You still haven't told us what you actually do. I work in linguistics analysis for federal agencies, I said, trying to sound confident. I can't discuss specifics because of security protocols. Security protocols, Jake repeated, looking around the table. Did everyone hear that? Diane has security protocols now. My Uncle Richard, who'd had a few too many beers, leaned forward. Come on, kiddo, we're all family here. You can tell us what you really do for work. I am telling you what I really do. Diane, my mom said gently, in the tone she'd used when I was 7 and claiming I hadn't broken the vase, honey, we love you, but you don't have to make up stories. If you're having trouble finding steady work, we can help. That's when I realized they genuinely didn't believe me. This wasn't teasing or skepticism. They actually thought I was delusional or lying about having a professional job at all. I'm not making anything up, I said quietly. Then why won't you tell us where your office is? Jake challenged. Why can't you give us a phone number or a business card or anything normal people have when they have real jobs? I couldn't answer that. The truth was that my office was in an unmarked government facility. My business cards were generic and deliberately vague, and giving out phone numbers for my supervisors would have been a felony. But my silence just confirmed what they already believed. I saw it in their faces, a mixture of pity and frustration. They thought their daughter and sister had lost touch with reality. After that dinner, the family interventions started in earnest. My mom began suggesting therapists and career counselors. My dad offered to help me write a real resume. Jake took every opportunity to publicly contradict my job claims, usually in front of other people, as a way of forcing me to either provide details I couldn't give or admit I'd been lying. The isolation became overwhelming. I was doing genuinely important work that I was proud of, but I couldn't share that pride with the people who mattered most to me. Instead, I had to watch them lose respect from me day by day because they thought I was either delusional or deliberately deceiving them about the most basic facts of my adult life. Christmas was particularly brutal. We were at my grandparents' house, and my grandfather, who'd served in World War II, was talking about the importance of honest work in military service. Jake saw an opening. Tell Grandpa about your top-secret government job, Diane, he said with fake enthusiasm. I'm sure he'd love to hear about how you're saving America with your Latin homework. My grandfather looked at me expectantly. This was a man who'd earned a Purple Heart at Normandy, who understood what real service looked like. And I couldn't tell him that his granddaughter was following in that tradition, in her own small way. I do analysis work for federal agencies, I said, lamely. What kind of analysis? Grandpa asked, genuinely interested. Linguistic analysis, communication intercepts. I caught myself before saying too much. I help analyze foreign communications. Jake rolled his eyes. She means she pretends to translate things and calls it government work. My grandfather nodded slowly, but I could see the doubt in his expression. My own grandfather, a war veteran who dedicated his life to serving his country, thought I was lying about serving mine. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, I seriously considered quitting. The work was incredible, but the personal cost was becoming unbearable. How long could I let my family think I was delusional? How long could I watch their respect for me erode, knowing I was actually doing something that mattered, but being completely unable to prove it? I thought about Agent Caldwell's first approach, how he'd made this work sound like an honor and an opportunity. He hadn't mentioned that it would mean becoming a stranger to my own family, that I'd have to choose between the work I loved and the relationships that defined me. But then, Monday came, and I was back in Building 847 looking at communications intercepts that could potentially save lives. Dr. Chen briefed me on a new case, a group using coded messages hidden in fake academic papers about medieval poetry to coordinate cyber attacks on infrastructure targets. Looking at those documents, seeing the patterns emerge as I worked through the linguistic puzzles, I remembered why I'd taken this job in the first place. This wasn't just intellectual curiosity anymore. People's safety depended on this work, and there were very few people who could do it. I decided to stick it out, at least for a while longer. I told myself that eventually something would vindicate me. Maybe the work would become public somehow, or maybe I'd reach a point where I could share more details without compromising security. I had no idea how soon that vindication would come, or how dramatic it would be when it finally arrived. The assignment that changed everything came on a Tuesday in March. Dr. Chen called me into her office with an urgency I hadn't seen before. Usually, our briefings were methodical, almost academic. This time, she had 3 other people with her I'd never met. Diane, meet Agent Jennifer Walsh from the FBI, Commander David Torres from Naval Intelligence, and Dr. Amanda Foster from Cyber Command. Each one nodded as she spoke their names. We have a situation. Agent Walsh took over the briefing. 3 weeks ago, we intercepted communications suggesting a coordinated attack on multiple naval installations. The problem is, the messages are embedded in what appears to be academic correspondence about 12th century Provençal poetry. She handed me a stack of documents. At first glance, they looked like genuine scholarly exchanges between professors at different universities, discussions of troubadour manuscripts, debates about translation methodologies, requests for access to rare library collections. What makes you think these aren't legitimate academic conversations? I asked. Commander Torres leaned forward. The timing. These professors started corresponding exactly 2 weeks after we announced the relocation of a submarine fleet to Norfolk. The volume of their academic discussions increased dramatically right before 3 separate security incidents at naval installations. I started reading more carefully. The first red flag jumped out immediately. One of the supposed scholars was discussing the metric structure of Bernard de Vendarne's poems, but he was using terminology that didn't exist until the 15th century. It was like someone claiming Shakespeare wrote his sonnets on a typewriter.
This professor supposedly has a PhD from Yale in medieval literature, I said, pointing to one of the emails. But he's using Trobar Clus to describe poetic complexity in a way that shows he doesn't understand what the term actually meant in the 12th century. Dr. Foster looked interested. What should he have said? Trobar Clus referred to a specific style of deliberately obscure poetry that was meant to hide meaning from casual readers. If he were a real scholar, he'd nom at. But if he were someone using academic language as a cover for actual coded messages, I trailed off, realizing what I was looking at. Exactly, Agent Walsh said. We think they're using the structure of medieval poetic analysis to hide operational details. We need you to figure out what they're really saying. I spent the next 6 hours immersed in those documents. Slowly, a pattern emerged. The fake scholars weren't just using medieval literature as camouflage, they were using the actual linguistic structures of troubadour poetry to encode modern intelligence.
References to manuscript folios corresponded to numerical coordinates. Discussions of textual variants were actually describing different approaches to the same target. When one professor mentioned wanting to examine the original palimpsest beneath the visible text, he was talking about accessing classified information hidden within public documents. The breakthrough came when I realized they were using the rhyme scheme of a specific Provençal poem as a cipher key. Each stanza corresponded to a different phase of their operation. The academic debates about whether certain lines were authentic weren't scholarly arguments. They were discussions about which parts of the plan were confirmed and which needed revision. They're planning simultaneous penetrations of 3 facilities, I told the team, pointing to my analysis: Norfolk Naval Station, Groton Submarine Base, and Naval Air Station Pensacola. Based on this timeline embedded in their discussion of manuscript dating, they're moving in 6 days. Commander Torres was already on his phone before I finished speaking. The next 72 hours were unlike anything I'd experienced. I was moved to a secure facility in Washington, D.C., working around the clock with a joint task force. My job was to monitor ongoing communications and interpret any changes to the plan as they developed. It turned out the group had been operating for months, using academic conferences and scholarly journals as cover for recruitment and coordination. They'd built an entire fake scholarly network, complete with bogus research papers and fabricated conference presentations, all designed to hide a sophisticated intelligence operation. My analysis helped identify not just the immediate threat, but the entire network. Names, locations, funding sources, recruitment methods, all hidden in plain sight within what looked like boring academic correspondence about dead poets. The operation to stop them was coordinated across multiple agencies and took place simultaneously in 7 different states. I watched from the operations center as real-time reports came in. Arrests in Virginia, Florida, Connecticut, Georgia, and 2 locations I can't name. Seizure of weapons, surveillance equipment, and detailed facility blueprints. In the middle of all this, Dr. Chen pulled me aside. "Diane, we need to discuss your security status. After this case, you're going to be moved to a different classification level. There will be additional protocols, more restrictions on travel and communication." "What kind of restrictions?" "The kind that comes with being read into operations that have national security implications. Your work on this case potentially prevented multiple attacks on critical military infrastructure. That puts you in a very small group of people who know certain things." The weight of that hit me. I'd gone from translating interesting puzzles to being part of preventing actual attacks on American military targets. The work I'd been doing wasn't just intellectually challenging, it had a direct, measurable impact on national security. When I finally got back to Cedar Falls a week later, I was exhausted but also exhilarated. For the first time since taking this job, I felt like I could prove to my family that what I was doing mattered, even if I couldn't give them details. But they didn't see exhilaration. They saw someone who disappeared for a week without explanation, returning home looking haggard and claiming she'd been working on something important but classified. "Where have you been?" my mom demanded as soon as I walked through the door. "You missed your cousin's wedding. You didn't return phone calls. We were worried sick." "I was in Washington. Emergency work situation. I couldn't call." "Couldn't call for a week?" Jake had been waiting for me. "What kind of job doesn't let you make a phone call to your family for 7 days? I wanted to tell them I'd just helped prevent terrorist attacks, that I'd been working 18-hour days in a secure government facility analyzing intelligence that could save lives, that their daughter and sister were making a real difference in the world. Instead, I had to say, "I can't discuss the specifics, but it was important work." The look that passed between my parents was worse than anything they'd said before. It wasn't just skepticism anymore, it was a concern for my mental health. "Honey," my mom said gently, "we think maybe you should talk to someone. Dr. Peterson at the clinic is very good, and insurance covers. I don't need therapy. I need you to trust me when I tell you I have a real job doing important work." "Then prove it," Jake said bluntly. "Show us a paycheck, give us a supervisor's number, let us visit your office, do literally anything that normal people with real jobs can do." I couldn't. My paychecks were direct deposits from a generic federal accounting office. My supervisors couldn't be contacted by outside parties. My office was in a classified facility that didn't officially exist. I can't do those things because of security protocols. Security, my dad repeated slowly. Diane, do you understand how this sounds? You disappear for days at a time, you can't tell us where you work, you can't provide any proof that this job exists, and your explanation for everything is security protocols? Because that's the truth. Or, Jake said, you're having some kind of breakdown and you've created this elaborate fantasy to avoid dealing with reality. That conversation ended with my mom making an appointment with Dr. Peterson just to talk through some things, and my dad suggesting I move back home permanently until you get back on your feet. They weren't being cruel. They genuinely believed they were helping someone who was struggling with delusions or a mental health crisis, which made it worse because I couldn't even be angry with them for not believing something that, from their perspective, was completely unbelievable. The next few months were a constant cycle of tension and disappointment. Every time I left for work, I saw doubt in their eyes. Every time I came home tired or stressed, they saw it as evidence that I was struggling with whatever they thought was really wrong with me. I started avoiding family gatherings because I was tired of the pitying looks and careful conversations. My mom would call other relatives to check in on me, speaking in the hushed tones people use when discussing someone's illness. The worst part was that work was going incredibly well. The success of the naval installation case had led to more complex assignments. I was becoming the go-to analyst for cases involving linguistic steganography, hidden messages embedded in seemingly innocent text. I helped crack a human trafficking ring that was coordinating through fake restaurant reviews. I identified a weapons smuggling operation hiding logistics information in bogus art historical papers. Each case was more sophisticated than the last, and I was getting better at spotting the patterns. Dr. Chen started including me in briefings with higher-level officials. I was building a reputation within the intelligence community as someone who could find meaning in communications that looked completely innocent to everyone else. But at home, I was the family member everyone was worried about. The breaking point came in June. I'd been working on a particularly challenging case involving a group that was using fake genealogy research to map the movements of military families. The work required me to understand not just the linguistic patterns they were using, but also the cultural context of how genealogy research is conducted and shared online. I'd been at the office for 3 straight days, sleeping on a cot in the break room when we finally cracked their system. It turned out they were planning to target the families of deployed service members, using information gathered through seemingly innocent requests for help with family tree research. The arrest operation happened while I was still at the facility. I watched as locations across the country were simultaneously raided, preventing what could have been kidnappings and, worse, targeting military families. When I finally got home, my family was in the middle of what they later told me was an intervention they'd been planning for weeks. My parents, Jake, my Aunt Carol, and Dr. Peterson were all sitting in the living room waiting for me. They had pamphlets about treatment facilities and a prepared speech about how much they loved me and wanted to help me get the support I needed. "We know you've been struggling," my mom began, reading from notes she'd written. "And we want you to know that there's no shame in getting help for mental health issues." I was so exhausted from 3 days of intense work that I could barely process what was happening. I just helped prevent attacks on military families, and my own family was staging an intervention because they thought I was delusional. "We found a very good facility in Des Moines," Dr. Peterson said kindly. "They specialize in helping people who are having difficulty distinguishing between fantasy and reality." That's when I snapped. "I am not delusional," I said, louder than I'd intended. "I have a real job with real responsibilities, and I'm good at it. I help prevent actual crimes and actual attacks on actual people." "Diane," my dad started. "No, listen to me. I know this sounds impossible, but I work for federal intelligence agencies analyzing communications intercepts. I have top-secret clearance. I've helped stop terrorist attacks and human trafficking operations and weapons smuggling. I can't prove it to you because of security protocols, but it's real." The silence that followed was devastating. I could see in their faces that they thought this outburst confirmed their worst fears. I wasn't just making up stories about having a job, I was having elaborate fantasies about being some kind of secret agent. Dr. Peterson leaned forward with practiced compassion. Diane, these kinds of grandiose fantasies are actually quite common. The important thing is that we get you the help you need to. They're not fantasies. I was shouting now, which definitely wasn't helping my case. I really do this work. I really have a security clearance. Just because you can't understand it doesn't mean it's not real. That's when Jake played what he thought was his trump card. Okay, fine, he said. If you really work for the government doing top secret spy stuff, then prove it. Call your boss right now and have them tell us it's true. I couldn't explain that my supervisors were forbidden from confirming employment to outside parties. I couldn't explain that even acknowledging the existence of certain programs could be a federal crime. I couldn't explain that the very secrecy they found suspicious was exactly what proved the work was legitimate. So I just stood there, trapped by the same security protocols that made my work possible, watching my family lose the last of their faith in my sanity. The intervention ended with me agreeing to think about the treatment options they'd researched, and them agreeing to give me some space to come to terms with whatever they thought I was going through. But I could see it in their eyes. They'd moved past concern into resignation. They thought their daughter and sister were seriously mentally ill, and they were preparing for a long, difficult process of trying to help someone who didn't think she needed help. I went to my room that night knowing that something had to change. I couldn't keep living this double life, being successful and respected in one world while being pitied and doubted in another. I just had no idea that change was coming sooner than I thought, and in a way none of us could have predicted. Part 3. The call came at 4:47 a.m. on a Saturday in July. Dr. Chen's voice was tense in a way I'd never heard before. Diane, I need you at the facility in 2 hours. Bring everything. This could be extended deployment. What's the situation? Multiple agencies, highest priority. I can't say more over the phone. I threw clothes into a bag, left a note for my parents saying I'd been called away on urgent work, and drove through the empty Iowa countryside toward Building 847. The sunrise painted the cornfields gold, and I remember thinking how peaceful everything looked, having no idea I was driving toward the most intense 3 weeks of my career. The parking lot was fuller than I'd ever seen it. Government vehicles with plates from agencies I didn't recognize, black SUVs with tinted windows, and a helicopter on the usually empty landing pad behind the building. Inside, the normally quiet hallways buzzed with activity. People I'd never seen before were setting up additional workstations, running cables, and installing extra communication equipment. The whole facility had been transformed overnight. Dr. Chen met me at the security checkpoint with a new badge that had additional clearance levels I didn't recognize. What exactly am I walking into? I asked as we descended to what I now realized was a 4th sublevel I'd never known existed. Operation Blackout, she said. 3 days ago, we intercepted intelligence suggesting a coordinated cyber attack on critical infrastructure. Power grids, water treatment facilities, transportation systems. The scale is unprecedented. We entered a room the size of an aircraft hangar, full of workstations, massive screens displaying data feeds, and analysts from what looked like every federal agency that used acronyms: FBI, NSA, CIA, DHS, DoD, and several others I couldn't identify. The problem, Dr. Chen continued, is that the coordination is happening through the most sophisticated linguistic steganography we've ever encountered. They're hiding operational details in everything from social media posts about cooking recipes to academic papers about climate science to online gaming forums. She led me to a workstation where Commander Torres was waiting with 2 people I didn't recognize. Diane, meet Colonel Rachel Hayes from Air Force Intelligence and Agent Michael Chen from the NSA's Cryptologic Division. They'll be your primary liaisons for this operation. Colonel Hayes shook my hand with the grip of someone accustomed to command. Dr. Morrison, we've read your file. Your work on the naval installation case was exceptional. We need that same level of analysis, but on a much larger scale. Agent Chen, no relation to Dr. Chen despite the name, handed me a tablet loaded with intercepted communications. We're tracking 17 different cells across North America. They're using at least 9 different languages, including some we think might be artificially constructed. I started scrolling through the data. Cooking blogs with recipes that used measurements in impossible ratios. Academic papers about medieval architecture with footnotes that referenced buildings that never existed. Gaming forum discussions about strategy games where the tactical advice made no sense for the games being discussed. "How long do we have?" I asked. "Based on patterns in the communication frequency, we estimate they're moving to active operations in 10 days, Colonel Hayes said, maybe less. The next week was unlike anything I'd experienced in government work. The operation had been classified at levels that required me to sign additional security documents and undergo what felt like a second background investigation compressed into 48 hours. I was working 18-hour days alongside analysts who'd been pulled from assignments around the world. Linguists, cryptographers, computer scientists, and behavioral psychologists, all trying to decode a communication network that spanned multiple continents and used deception techniques we'd never seen before. My role was to identify the linguistic signatures that indicated hidden meaning within seemingly innocent text. But these weren't the historical language puzzles I was used to. The group had created entirely new ways of hiding information. They were using the grammatical structures of different languages to encode numerical data. A blog post about Italian cooking that used slightly incorrect verb conjugations was actually transmitting GPS coordinates. Academic papers about Russian literature that contained subtle translation errors were communicating target identities. The breakthrough came when I realized they were using machine translation artifacts as a cipher system. When you use automated translation software, it makes predictable mistakes based on the grammatical differences between languages. The group was deliberately introducing these translation errors into text that appeared to be originally written in English, creating a hidden layer of meaning that only someone who understood both the source and target languages would recognize. "They're not just hiding messages," I explained to the task force during a midnight briefing. "They're hiding them in a way that makes them look like innocent mistakes made by non-native speakers or translation software." Colonel Hayes leaned forward. "Can you crack their system?" "I think so, but I need more examples of their communications, and I need to understand the linguistic background of whoever is creating these messages." That led to the most intense research phase of my career. I was analyzing thousands of intercepted messages, looking for patterns in the artificial errors, trying to reverse engineer the linguistic knowledge and cultural assumptions of people I'd never met. The NSA provided me with communication intercepts going back 6 months. The FBI shared behavioral analysis of known cell members. International partners sent linguistic samples from related investigations in Europe and Asia. Slowly, the pattern emerged. The group's communication system was based on a sophisticated understanding of how different languages handle concepts, like temporal relationships, spatial descriptions, and numerical expressions. They were using the differences between, say, how English and Mandarin express time relationships to encode scheduling information. But the real revelation came when I realized that whoever designed their system had made a fundamental error in their understanding of classical Arabic grammar. They were using verb forms that hadn't existed for 800 years, thinking they were being historically accurate, but actually creating anachronisms that made their messages identifiable. "I can track them," I told Commander Torres. "Every message they send using this system contains the same grammatical signature. It's like a linguistic fingerprint." The next phase moved faster than anything I'd experienced in government work. Using the patterns I'd identified, the task force was able to trace communications back to source locations, identify cell structures, and predict operational timing. But we also discovered the scope of what we were facing. This wasn't just a cyber attack. It was a coordinated assault on infrastructure designed to cause maximum disruption during a specific time window that coincided with several major public events. "They're not just trying to take down power grids," Agent Chen explained during an emergency briefing. "They're timing it to coincide with major transportation hubs being at peak capacity. The goal is to cause maximum civilian panic and economic disruption." I'd been at the facility for 12 days straight, sleeping in shifts, eating meals from vending machines, and working through communication intercepts from around the world. My clothes were wrinkled, I hadn't seen sunlight in over a week, and I was running on caffeine and adrenaline. But I was also doing the most important work of my life. The linguistic analysis I was providing was directly contributing to operations that would save lives and prevent economic catastrophe. Every pattern I identified, every coded message I decoded, every cell structure I helped map was part of preventing something that could have affected millions of people. The arrest phase began at dawn on the 13th day. I watched from the operations center as coordinated raids took place in 17 cities across 4 countries. Real-time feeds from FBI, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Interpol, and other agencies showed simultaneous operations arresting people who'd been communicating through cooking blogs and academic papers. The cyber infrastructure they'd been planning to attack was secured. The malware they developed was isolated and analyzed. The financial networks they'd been using were frozen and traced back to source countries. And throughout all of this, I was receiving commendations from agencies I'd only heard about in movies. Colonels and directors, and people with titles I couldn't repeat, were thanking me personally for analysis that had been crucial to the entire operation. When it was finally over, Dr. Chen found me at my workstation at 3 a.m., staring at a screen showing the final operational reports. "Diane, you need to go home. Get some real sleep, see your family, remember what normal life looks like. When do I report back?"
She smiled. "After this, you're getting a promotion and a transfer to a position with the Joint Task Force. But first, take 2 weeks. You've earned it." The drive back to Cedar Falls felt surreal. I'd been gone for 2 weeks, completely out of contact with my family, working on something I couldn't describe that had potentially prevented a national catastrophe. But to them, I just disappeared again with no explanation, confirming their belief that I was either lying about my job or having a complete mental breakdown. I walked into the house at 6 a.m. to find my mom sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a stack of brochures for treatment facilities. "Oh, honey," she said, looking at my appearance, "you look terrible. Where have you been?" I looked at myself in the hallway mirror. She was right. I looked like someone who'd been living in a bunker for 2 weeks, which was essentially accurate. "Washington, emergency situation. I couldn't contact anyone." The look in her eyes was a mixture of sadness and frustration that I recognized immediately. She'd moved past anger into resignation. She thought her daughter was seriously ill and was refusing to get help. "Diane, Dr. Peterson thinks it would be good for you to spend some time in a structured environment where you can focus on getting better." "Mom, I'm not sick. I've been working on something incredibly important. I can't give you details, but people's lives depended on what I was doing." "Sweetheart, I know you believe that, but believing something doesn't make it real." That afternoon, Jake staged what he probably thought was going to be the final confrontation. He'd invited several extended family members over for what he announced as an honest conversation about Diane's situation. My aunts, uncles, and cousins gathered in the living room while I sat in the middle, looking like a defendant at trial. Jake had prepared what was essentially a presentation about why they thought I needed professional help. "She's been gone for 2 weeks with no contact," he began. "She claims to be working for the government but can't provide any proof. She looks like she hasn't slept or eaten properly. And when we ask simple questions about her job, she talks about classified operations and national security." My Aunt Carol nodded sympathetically. "Honey, we're not trying to hurt you. We just want you to get the help you need." "We've researched facilities that specialize in these kinds of delusions," my Uncle Richard added, "places where you can work with professionals who understand what you're going through." I sat there listening to my own family plan in my commitment to a psychiatric facility, knowing I'd just helped prevent one of the largest coordinated attacks on American infrastructure in history. The irony was so complete, it was almost funny. "What if I could prove it?" I asked quietly. "Prove what?" Jake asked. "What if I could prove that my job is real, that I really do work for federal intelligence agencies, that everything I've been telling you is true?" The silence that followed was heavy with pity. They thought I was about to present more elaborate fantasies as evidence. "Sweetheart," my mom said gently, "we've been through this. You can't prove something that isn't real." "But what if I could? What if someone with the proper authority confirmed everything I've been telling you?"
Diane, Dr. Peterson said, part of recovery is learning to distinguish between what we wish were true and what actually is true. That's when I made a decision that I knew could end my career, but might save my relationship with my family. I'm going to make a phone call, I said. I'm going to call my supervisor and ask them to send someone here to confirm my employment and security status. Honey, no, my mom started, but I was already heading for the phone. I called Dr. Chen's emergency number. Chen here. Dr. Chen, it's Diane Morrison. I need to ask for something unusual. What's the situation? My family thinks I'm delusional. They're planning to have me committed because they don't believe my job exists. I need official confirmation of my employment status. There was a long pause. Diane, you know that's not possible. We don't confirm employment to outside parties. I know, but I'm asking anyway. If I lose my family over this job, the job isn't worth having. Another pause. Let me make some calls. Don't do anything drastic in the meantime. I hung up and rejoined the family meeting, where everyone was looking at me with expressions that ranged from concern to exhaustion. Well, Jake asked. I made the call. We'll see what happens. What happened was beyond anything any of us could have imagined. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of helicopters. Not unusual for rural Iowa during harvest season, but these weren't crop dusters. These were military helicopters, flying in formation, heading directly toward our property. I looked out my bedroom window to see 2 black helicopters circling our house before landing in the field behind our barn. My family was already gathered in the kitchen, staring out the back window in bewilderment. What in the world? My dad started. But his words were cut off by a knock at the front door. Not a normal knock, a sharp, authoritative rap that made it clear whoever was outside expected immediate attention. My mom opened the door to find 2 men in military dress uniforms. One was tall with close-cropped gray hair and more ribbons on his chest than I'd ever seen outside of a military museum. The other was younger, built like a linebacker, with the kind of posture that screamed special operations. Good morning, ma'am, the older man said, with crisp military courtesy. I'm Admiral James Mitchell, Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence. This is Master Chief Petty Officer David Harrison, Navy SEALs. We're here to speak with Diane Morrison. My mother's face went completely white. She turned to look at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Confusion mixed with the dawning realization that something she'd believed to be impossible might actually be true.
She's Diane, she called, her voice cracking slightly. I walked to the front door, my heart pounding. I'd asked Dr. Chen to confirm my employment, but I hadn't expected anything like this. Ms. Morrison, Admiral Mitchell said, extending his hand, we need to speak with you about your request yesterday. Behind him, I could see more personnel getting out of the helicopters. People in suits, people in military uniforms, people carrying equipment cases and communication devices. Admiral, I said, shaking his hand, I think there might be some misunderstanding. I just asked for employment verification. Master Chief Harrison stepped forward. Ma'am, after the work you did on Operation Blackout, there's no such thing as just employment verification. Your analysis prevented what could have been the largest coordinated attack on American infrastructure in our history. My family was clustered behind me now, listening to every word. I could feel their shock radiating like heat. May we come in? Admiral Mitchell asked. We have some things to discuss with you and your family. The next hour was the most surreal of my life. My living room, where just yesterday my family had been planning my psychiatric commitment, was now filled with high-ranking military officers and federal agents. Admiral Mitchell had brought what he called a family briefing team, people whose job was to explain classified operations to family members when circumstances required it. Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, he began, addressing my parents directly, your daughter has been working under the highest levels of security clearance for the past 18 months. Her work in linguistic analysis has contributed to operations that have saved thousands of lives and prevented multiple attacks on American soil. Agent Sarah Rodriguez from the FBI took over. We understand this comes as a shock.
Diane's work requires absolute secrecy, which means she hasn't been able to share details of what she does, even with family. Jake, who'd been silent since the helicopters arrived, finally found his voice. You're saying she actually works for the government? Like, does it really work for the government? Master Chief Harrison answered, Sir, your sister holds top secret SCI clearance and has been read into programs that fewer than 200 people in the country have access to. Her linguistic analysis capabilities are considered a national asset. Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway. She'd arrived in one of the helicopters and had been coordinating with the other officials outside. Diane, she said, I know you asked for employment verification, but when Admiral Mitchell heard about your situation, he decided this required a more comprehensive response. Admiral Mitchell nodded. Ms. Morrison, your work on Operation Blackout was exceptional. Your analysis identified patterns that our entire cryptographic division had missed. But more importantly, you did it under extreme pressure, working 18-hour days for 2 weeks straight, contributing to an operation that prevented catastrophic attacks on civilian infrastructure. He turned to address my family directly. I want you to understand what your daughter has accomplished. 3 weeks ago, we faced a coordinated cyber attack that could have taken down power grids in major cities, disabled transportation systems, and caused economic damage in the hundreds of billions. Diane's linguistic analysis was crucial to identifying and stopping those attacks. Agent Rodriguez opened a folder and pulled out several official documents. These are commendations from the FBI, NSA, Department of Homeland Security, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, all recognizing Diane's contributions to national security operations. She handed the documents to my parents. My mom took them with shaking hands, staring at official letterheads and signatures from people whose names she recognized from news broadcasts. But why couldn't she tell us any of this? My dad asked. Colonel Hayes, who'd apparently also made the trip from Washington, answered, Sir, the work your daughter does involves intercepting and analyzing enemy communications. If her identity or methods became known to hostile actors, it could compromise ongoing operations and put her life in danger. Her life? My mom whispered. Ma'am, the people your daughter helps catch are not ordinary criminals. They're terrorists, weapons smugglers, human traffickers, and hostile foreign intelligence operatives. Her work has directly contributed to dismantling networks that would have no hesitation about targeting her if they knew who she was. The room fell silent as the weight of that settled over everyone. My family was finally understanding not just that my job was real, but why the secrecy had been necessary. Master Chief Harrison addressed Jake directly. Sir, I understand you've been skeptical about your sister's work. I want you to know that in 20 years of special operations, I've worked with intelligence analysts around the world. Your sister is among the best I've ever seen. The linguistic patterns she can identify, the connections she makes between seemingly unrelated communications, it's extraordinary. Jake, who'd been stunned, she really prevented terrorist attacks? Multiple attacks, sir. Her work on the naval installation case alone prevented coordinated strikes on 3 major military bases. The trafficking case she worked on last month led to arrests across 4 countries and saved dozens of victims. Admiral Mitchell stepped forward with another folder. Diane, I have something else to discuss with you. Your performance on Operation Blackout has led to a formal offer for a position with the Joint Intelligence Task Force. It comes with additional security clearances, a significant salary increase, and the opportunity to work on cases with international scope. I looked around the room at my family's faces. The doubt was gone, replaced by something that looked like awe mixed with concern. There's one condition, Admiral Mitchell continued. The position requires relocation to Washington, D.C. You'd be working out of a facility that handles the most sensitive intelligence operations in the country. My mom spoke up immediately. Will she be safer there? Colonel Hayes answered, Mrs. Morrison, the facility has the highest security classification in the federal government. She'd be as safe as anyone in the intelligence community can be. What about communication? My dad asked. Will we be able to talk to her? Agent Rodriguez nodded. The communication restrictions will actually be relaxed. Once she's in the DC position, she'll be able to have more regular contact with family, though she still won't be able to discuss specific operations. I realized they were talking about my life as if the decision had already been made, but I needed to hear something else first. What about you? I asked my family. After everything that's happened, after thinking I was delusional for months, how do you feel about all this? My mom was crying. Not the worried tears I'd seen so much of lately, but tears of relief and pride, and probably guilt for not believing me. Honey, she said, I am so proud of you, and so sorry we didn't trust you. It seemed impossible. My dad cleared his throat. Diane, we owe you an apology, a big one. You were doing something incredible, something that matters, and we made you feel like you were crazy. Jake was quiet for a long moment before speaking. I kept saying you should prove it was real, but you couldn't prove it without risking everything. I didn't understand that. None of us understood, my Aunt Carol added quietly. We thought we were helping, but we were just making everything harder for you. Admiral Mitchell gave us a moment before continuing. There's one more thing. Because of the sensitive nature of Diane's work, and because her family has now been briefed on certain aspects of her role, you'll all need to sign security agreements. Nothing detailed, but acknowledgments that you understand some information cannot be shared outside this family. Agent Rodriguez handed out documents to everyone. These just formalize that you understand Diane works in classified intelligence and that you won't discuss her specific role with others. As my family signed the papers, I realized how completely everything had changed in the span of 2 hours. This morning, they'd been planning my psychiatric commitment. Now they were signing federal security agreements and learning that their daughter and sister had been preventing terrorist attacks. Master Chief Harrison approached me as the other officials began packing up their materials. Miss Morrison, I wanted to tell you something personally. I've worked with a lot of analysts over the years. Most of them do good work, contribute to successful operations, help keep the country safe. But what you do, finding patterns that nobody else sees, making connections across different languages and cultures, that's not just good work, that's exceptional. Thank you, Master Chief. The offer Admiral Mitchell mentioned, the DC position, you should take it. You're wasted out here in the middle of nowhere, no offense to your hometown. The Joint Task Force handles cases that could affect millions of people. You could make an even bigger difference. After the officials left and the helicopters disappeared over the horizon, my family and I sat in the suddenly quiet living room, trying to process what had just happened. So, Jake said finally, when you said you worked for the government, you meant you really work for the government? The whole time, I confirmed. And when you disappeared for days, you were actually preventing attacks and saving lives? Yes. And we spent months thinking you were having a breakdown. Yes. He was quiet for another moment. I feel like the world's biggest idiot. Join the club, my dad said. Our daughter was out there doing something extraordinary, and we were planning to have her committed. My mom had been looking through the commendation letters. Honey, this one is from the president. The president of the United States wrote you a thank you letter. I'd forgotten about that one. It had arrived after Operation Blackout, along with commendations from so many agencies that Dr. Chen had needed a separate folder just to hold them all. The work matters, I said. That's what I kept trying to tell you. I couldn't explain why it mattered, but it does. We believe you now, my mom said. We believe you, and we're so proud of you, and we're so sorry we didn't trust you. That evening, as we sat around the dinner table, the first normal family dinner we'd had in months, I made my decision about Admiral Mitchell's offer. I'm going to take the DC position, I announced. Really? My dad asked. Really. The work is important, and I'm good at it. But mostly, now that you know what I do, I don't have to choose between my career and my family anymore. Jake grinned. My sister, the secret government operative? Wait until I tell people at work. You can't tell people at work, I reminded him. Security agreement, remember? Right, my sister, the government contractor who does translation work. We all laughed, and for the first time in almost 2 years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged, doing work that mattered with a family that finally understood and supported what I was doing. 3 weeks later, I started work at the Joint Intelligence Task Force in Washington, D.C. The cases were more complex, the security even tighter, and the impact of the work more significant than anything I'd done in Iowa. But the best part was the weekly phone calls home, where I could finally share the pride I felt in my work, even if I couldn't share the details. My family understood now that when I said I couldn't talk about something, it wasn't because I was making it up. It was because what I was doing really was too important and too sensitive to discuss. And every time I cracked a new case, identified a new pattern, or helped prevent another attack, I thought about that morning when 2 Navy SEALs landed in our backyard to confirm that sometimes the most unbelievable truth is still the truth. My family never doubted me again. 6 months into my new position in Washington, D.C., I thought the hardest part of my career was behind me. I had a state-of-the-art office and a facility that didn't officially exist, a team of analysts who respected my work, and regular communication with my family who finally understood what I did for a living. But intelligence work has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. The case that would define my entire career started with a single intercepted email that landed on my desk on a Thursday morning in February. It looked like spam, a message about a limited-time offer for vintage wine collections, sent from what appeared to be a small Italian vineyard to collectors around the world. "Why is this on my desk?" I asked Agent Lisa Parker, my new supervisor at the Joint Task Force. Because it was sent to 17 different email addresses that are all connected to persons of interest in ongoing investigations. The FBI flagged it, but their cryptographers can't find anything unusual about the text. I read through the email. Perfect Italian grammar, detailed descriptions of wine varieties, shipping information, payment instructions. Everything looked legitimate, except for one small detail that made my linguistic training kick in. "Italian is too perfect," I said after studying it for 10 minutes. Agent Parker looked confused. Too perfect? Native Italian speakers don't write formal business emails this grammatically correct. There are tiny colloquialisms and regional speech patterns that would naturally appear in commercial correspondence. This reads like it was written by someone who learned Italian from a textbook, not someone who grew up speaking it. That observation led to 3 weeks of the most complex analysis I'd ever attempted. Using linguistic forensic software I'd helped develop, I began breaking down every sentence, every word choice, every grammatical construction in that innocent-looking wine advertisement. What I discovered changed everything I thought I knew about international intelligence operations. The email wasn't hiding a message within the text, it was the message. The wine descriptions, the vintage years, the shipping weights, the payment methods, everything was code, but not the kind of code cryptographers usually look for. This was steganography, using commercial language patterns to hide a complete operational blueprint. Vintage year 1987 referred to a specific type of explosive device. Shipping weight 2.3 kilograms indicated the number of operatives assigned to each target. Payment via wire transfer designated the timeline for coordinated attacks. But the real breakthrough came when I realized the email addresses weren't just connected to persons of interest. They were connected to a network that spanned 6 countries and included people we'd never identified as threats before. "Agent Parker," I said during our morning briefing, "I think we're looking at something much larger than anyone realized." I'd mapped out the entire network on a digital whiteboard. Names, locations, communication patterns, operational hierarchies. It looked like a spider web that stretched from Europe to North America to Asia. "How large?" she asked. "I count at least 47 active operatives, coordinating what appears to be simultaneous operations in 9 major cities. And based on the linguistic patterns I'm seeing in their communications, they've been planning this for over 2 years. Agent Parker stared at the board. "What kind of operations?" "I'm still working on that, but the references to vintage preservation and climate-controlled storage suggest they're targeting infrastructure that requires environmental controls. Power plants, data centers, chemical facilities." That afternoon, I was called into a briefing with officials whose names I still can't mention. The room was full of people from agencies I didn't know existed, all focused on understanding what I'd discovered in that wine email. "Dr. Morrison," said a woman whose badge identified her only as Director Singh, "your analysis suggests we're facing a coordinated international operation. What's your confidence level in this assessment?" "Based on the linguistic evidence, I'm 95% certain. The communication patterns are too sophisticated and too consistent to be anything else. Director Singh exchanged glances with the other officials. We need you to expand this analysis. Full resources, unlimited access, highest priority classification. What followed was the most intense month of my career. I was moved to a secure facility outside Washington where I worked with an international team of analysts, linguists, and intelligence officers from allied countries. The wine email had been just the beginning. We discovered an entire communication network using commercial correspondence to coordinate what appeared to be the largest planned attack on Western infrastructure in decades. My job was to decode the linguistic patterns and map the operational structure. Every day brought new intercepted communications disguised as business emails, academic correspondence, travel bookings, even social media posts about hobbies and interests. I developed new analytical techniques specifically for this case, combining traditional linguistic analysis with behavioral pattern recognition and cultural context analysis. I could identify fake business correspondence not just by grammar errors, but by understanding how real businesses in different countries actually communicate with customers. The network we uncovered was staggering in its scope and sophistication. Cells in London, Paris, Berlin, Toronto, Chicago, Los Angeles, Sydney, and Tokyo all coordinated through innocuous-looking commercial communications. They'd spent years building legitimate business fronts, establishing communication patterns that looked completely normal to automated surveillance systems. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd tried to make their communications too perfect. Real businesses have regional variations in language use, seasonal changes in communication patterns, and individual personality differences that show up in writing style. The network's communications were too consistent, too grammatically perfect, too devoid of the natural variations that characterize genuine business correspondence. It's like they created a linguistics textbook example of business communication, I explained to the International Task Force during a briefing 3 weeks into the investigation. But real business communication isn't textbook perfect. It's messy, inconsistent, and full of regional and personal variations. Using that insight, we were able to identify over 200 fake businesses across multiple countries, all connected to the network. Wine importers, art dealers, technology consultants, travel agencies, an entire fake economy designed to hide one of the most sophisticated terrorist organizations anyone had ever encountered. The final phase of the operation took place simultaneously across 8 time zones. I watched from the International Coordination Center as law enforcement agencies in 9 countries executed synchronized raids based on intelligence derived from linguistic analysis of fake wine advertisements. The scope of what we prevented still gives me chills. Coordinated attacks on power grids, data centers, and chemical facilities that would have caused widespread blackouts, communication disruptions, and environmental disasters affecting millions of people across multiple continents. In the aftermath, I received commendations from intelligence agencies in 7 different countries, but more importantly, I realized that my work had evolved far beyond translation and analysis. I'd become part of something larger, an international effort to protect civilian populations from threats that most people would never know existed. The wine case, as it became known within the intelligence community, established new protocols for identifying sophisticated communication networks. The analytical techniques I developed became standard training for linguists and intelligence analysts around the world. But perhaps the most significant outcome was personal. For the first time since taking this job, I felt completely certain about my career path. This wasn't just work, it was a calling. The combination of intellectual challenge and meaningful impact was exactly what I'd been looking for without realizing it. When I finally returned to my regular duties in Washington, I had a new appreciation for the complexity and importance of intelligence work. Every intercepted message, every communication pattern, every linguistic anomaly could be the key to preventing catastrophic attacks on innocent people. And when I called my family to tell them I'd been working on another major case, without giving any details, of course, I could hear the pride in their voices. They understood now that when I disappeared for weeks at a time, it wasn't because I was avoiding them or making up stories about my work. It was because I was helping protect people, including them, from threats they'd never know about. The wine case taught me that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who hide in plain sight, communicating through perfectly ordinary business correspondence. And sometimes the most important work is done by people who will never receive public recognition for preventing disasters that never happened. That's the strange satisfaction of intelligence work, knowing that your greatest successes are measured by the catastrophes that don't occur, the attacks that are stopped before they begin, the threats that are neutralized before anyone realizes they exist. 6 months after the wine case concluded, I was promoted to senior analyst and given my own team of linguists specializing in commercial communication analysis. We've since identified and disrupted dozens of similar networks, each one using increasingly sophisticated methods to hide operational communications within legitimate business correspondence. But I still remember that first wine email and how a single grammatical observation about overly perfect Italian led to preventing attacks across multiple continents. It's a reminder that in intelligence work, the smallest details can have the biggest consequences, and that sometimes the most unbelievable truth is hiding in the most ordinary places. 2 years into leading my own team in Washington, I thought I understood the full scope of what linguistic intelligence could accomplish. I'd prevented attacks, dismantled networks, and developed analytical methods that were being used by agencies around the world. But nothing prepared me for the case that would make me question everything I thought I knew about communication, deception, and the limits of human ingenuity. It started with something that shouldn't have been suspicious at all: a surge in academic collaboration between universities. Dr. Rebecca Stone from the Department of Education's Research Division contacted our office on a Monday morning in September. "We're seeing an unusual increase in joint research proposals between American universities and institutions in Eastern Europe," she explained during our initial briefing. "Normally, international academic cooperation is something we encourage, but the volume and timing have raised some flags." She handed me a stack of research proposals. Topics ranged from medieval literature to quantum physics to agricultural science, all perfectly legitimate academic subjects, all following proper academic formatting and language conventions. "What made you suspicious?" I asked. "The speed. These partnerships are being established and funded faster than normal academic bureaucracy should allow. Some of these proposals were submitted, reviewed, approved, and funded within 3 weeks. In my experience, legitimate academic collaboration takes months or years to develop." I spent the weekend reading through the proposals. The academic language was flawless. The research objectives were clearly stated. The methodologies were appropriate for each field. If I hadn't been looking for deception, I would have seen nothing but genuine scholarly collaboration. But there was something about the writing that bothered me. It took me 3 days to identify what was wrong. "The citations are too perfect," I told my team during our Tuesday morning briefing. Agent Kevin Walsh, who joined my team 6 months earlier, looked confused. Too perfect how? Academic writing has personality. Scholars have preferences about which sources they cite, how they structure arguments, even which edition of classic texts they reference. These proposals cite exactly the sources you'd expect for each topic, in exactly the proportions you'd expect, with exactly the right balance of recent and historical references. Agent Maria Santos, my most experienced analyst, caught on immediately, like someone used a database to generate academically correct citation patterns rather than doing actual research. Exactly. Real scholars have quirks. They overcite their favorite authors, they have strong opinions about competing theories, they reference obscure papers that influence their thinking. These proposals read like they were written by artificial intelligence trained on academic writing samples. That observation led to the most complex investigation of my career. Working with computer scientists from the NSA's Artificial Intelligence Division, we developed new analytical tools specifically designed to detect artificially generated academic content. What we discovered was extraordinary and terrifying in equal measure. The network we'd identified wasn't just using fake academic proposals as cover for communication. They were using machine learning algorithms to generate perfect academic camouflage for a massive intelligence operation targeting American research institutions. They're not just stealing research, explained Dr. Jennifer Liu, the AI specialist assigned to work with our team. They're systematically mapping the entire American academic research infrastructure. Who's working on what projects, which researchers have access to classified information, how university security systems operate, where sensitive research is being conducted. The fake academic collaboration was actually a sophisticated data collection operation. Every legitimate researcher who responded to these proposals, every university administrator who reviewed them, every email exchange about potential collaboration was being analyzed and stored in a massive database designed to identify vulnerabilities in American research security. But the most alarming discovery came when we realized the scope of their operation. Using linguistic analysis combined with AI detection algorithms, we identified over 800 fake academic proposals submitted to universities across the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom over the past 18 months. This isn't just espionage, I told Director Singh during an emergency briefing. This is preparation for something much larger. They're mapping our entire academic research infrastructure with a level of detail that suggests they're planning physical operations, not just information theft. Director Singh leaned forward. Physical operations? The proposals aren't random. They're specifically targeting universities conducting research in areas related to national security, defense technology, and critical infrastructure. Someone is building a comprehensive map of where our most sensitive research is being conducted and who has access to it. The investigation expanded to include counterintelligence teams from multiple agencies. My role was to develop methods for identifying artificially generated academic content and tracing it back to source networks. But as we dug deeper, we discovered that the academic proposal operation was just one component of something much more sophisticated. The same network was generating fake content across multiple domains, not just academic proposals, but business communications, social media profiles, news articles, and even dating site profiles. They'd created an entire artificial online ecosystem designed to infiltrate and map American society at every level. It's like they're trying to create a social credit system for the United States, Agent Walsh observed during one of our analysis sessions. But instead of tracking citizen behavior for social control, they're mapping institutional vulnerabilities for potential attacks. Working with international partners, we traced the network's origins to a state-sponsored operation that had been active for over 3 years. The sophistication of their approach was unlike anything we'd encountered before. Instead of traditional espionage methods, they were using artificial intelligence to create perfect camouflage for a comprehensive intelligence gathering operation. The linguistic challenge was unprecedented. I had to develop new analytical methods that could distinguish between human-generated and AI-generated academic writing at a level of precision that had never been attempted before. The differences were subtle: word choice patterns that were statistically improbable for human authors, citation behaviors that were too consistent across different supposed researchers, argument structures that followed algorithmic logic rather than human reasoning patterns. But the most crucial breakthrough came when I realized that the AI-generated content contained embedded instructions for human operatives. The academic proposals weren't just camouflage, they were actually encoding operational directives within seemingly innocent scholarly language. Look at this research methodology section, I explained to the Joint Task Force during a classified briefing. It describes data collection procedures that are completely inappropriate for the stated research topic. But if you read it as operational instructions for intelligence gathering, it makes perfect sense. References to systematic sampling of institutional databases were actually instructions for hacking university computer systems. Descriptions of participant observation in campus environments were directions for surveillance operations. Collaborative data sharing protocols outlined methods for extracting and transmitting stolen information. The academic proposals were serving triple duty: camouflaging the operation from detection, mapping American research infrastructure, and providing operational guidance to human operatives embedded within the system. Once we understood the true nature of what we were facing, the investigation became a race against time. Intelligence from multiple sources suggested that the mapping phase of the operation was nearing completion, which meant active attacks on research facilities could begin at any moment. My team worked 18-hour days for 3 weeks, analyzing thousands of documents, tracing communication networks, and identifying the human operatives who were receiving and executing the AI-generated instructions. The linguistic forensics required unprecedented precision. We had to distinguish between legitimate academic researchers and foreign operatives based solely on subtle patterns in their written communications. The complexity was staggering. We identified fake researchers who'd been corresponding with legitimate scientists for months, gradually building relationships that provided access to increasingly sensitive information. We found AI-generated social media profiles that had been used to befriend university security personnel. We discovered fake news articles designed to influence academic policy decisions in ways that would create security vulnerabilities. The operation to neutralize the network required coordination with law enforcement agencies in 7 countries. The academic institutions that had been targeted needed to be notified and secured without alerting the operatives that their network had been compromised. The timing had to be perfect. If we moved too early, key operatives would escape. If we waited too long, active attacks on research facilities could begin. I found myself at the center of an international intelligence operation involving agencies I'd never worked with before. My linguistic analysis had become the key to identifying and stopping what intelligence officials were calling the most sophisticated academic espionage operation in modern history. The final phase began at dawn on a Tuesday in November. Simultaneous raids in dozens of locations across multiple countries, targeting individuals been identified through linguistic analysis of their communications with the AI-generated academic network. From the Joint Operations Center, I watched as years of painstaking analysis translated into real-world action. Arrests of operatives who'd been masquerading as legitimate researchers, seizure of computer systems containing detailed maps of American research infrastructure, recovery of classified information that had been stolen from university laboratories. But the most significant outcome was the prevention of coordinated attacks on research facilities that would have set back American scientific progress by decades. The intelligence we'd gathered suggested that the network had been preparing to simultaneously strike laboratories conducting research in quantum computing, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and advanced material science. The damage they could have caused is incalculable, Director Singh told me during the post-operation briefing. Not just the immediate physical destruction, but the long-term impact on American technological leadership. Your analysis didn't just prevent attacks, it preserved America's scientific future. In the aftermath, my methods for detecting AI-generated content became classified training materials for intelligence analysts worldwide. Universities implemented new security protocols based on our findings. International agreements were established for sharing information about sophisticated academic espionage operations. But the personal impact was equally significant. I'd gone from being someone who analyzed intercepted communications to being someone whose work shaped international policy and security protocols. The combination of linguistic analysis and artificial intelligence detection had created entirely new categories of intelligence work. The academic espionage case also marked a turning point in how I thought about my career. I wasn't just solving puzzles anymore. I was helping define the future of intelligence work in an era where artificial intelligence could create perfect camouflage for human operations. 6 months after the operation concluded, I was invited to brief members of Congress about the implications of AI-generated content for national security. Standing in a secure briefing room in the Capitol, explaining to senators and representatives how artificial intelligence could be used to create undetectable espionage operations, I realized how far I'd traveled from my first day analyzing communications in that underground facility in Iowa. The work had evolved from translation to analysis to development of entirely new intelligence methodologies. Each case had built on the previous ones, creating a career trajectory I never could have planned, but that felt absolutely right in hindsight. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect was the knowledge that my family now understood not just that my work was real, but that it was helping shape how America defended itself against threats they couldn't imagine. When I called home after the academic espionage operation concluded, my mom's first question wasn't about when I'd visit next, it was whether I was safe, because she now understood that my work sometimes put me at the center of operations that made international news. "We're proud of you," she said, simply. "We don't understand everything you do, but we know it matters." That understanding that my work mattered not just to intelligence agencies but to the future security of the country had become the driving force of my career. Every case was an opportunity to develop new methods, prevent new types of attacks, and stay ahead of adversaries who were constantly evolving their techniques. The academic espionage case had taught me that the future of intelligence work would require combining traditional human analysis with artificial intelligence detection, linguistic forensics with computer science, academic expertise with operational experience. I was no longer just a linguist working for the government. I was helping define what intelligence work would look like in an age where reality itself could be artificially generated. 5 years after Navy SEALs landed in my family's backyard, I stood in the White House Rose Garden receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom for contributions to national security. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same family who'd once planned my psychiatric commitment was now watching their daughter receive the highest civilian honor in America. But the real story wasn't the ceremony or the medal, it was what had happened the week before, during what would become my final case as an active intelligence analyst. I'd been called to an emergency briefing about communications that seemed completely impossible to decode. Every agency had tried: NSA cryptographers, FBI linguists, CIA analysts, even international partners. Nothing worked. "The messages are appearing everywhere," Director Singh explained. "Social media, academic papers, news articles, personal emails, but they don't follow any pattern we've ever seen. They're not hidden in existing text, they are the text, but they mean something completely different from what they appear to say." She showed me examples: a food blog about sourdough recipes, a scientific paper about butterfly migration patterns, a social media post about someone's vacation photos. All completely innocent, all perfectly written, all apparently meaningless from an intelligence perspective. "What makes you think they're intelligence communications?" I asked. "Timing. Every major terrorist attack or cyber breach in the past 6 months has been preceded by a surge in these types of posts. We know they're connected, but we can't figure out how." I spent 3 days reading through hundreds of these communications, looking for patterns that everyone else had missed. The breakthrough came when I stopped looking at the content and started analyzing the metadata, not what was being said, but when, where, and how it was being said. The sourdough blog wasn't hiding messages in the recipes. The timing of when each recipe was posted, combined with the number of ingredients and the fermentation temperature, created a numerical sequence that corresponded to coordinates and dates. The butterfly migration paper wasn't concealing operational plans in the academic language. The migration routes described in the paper, when mapped against actual geography, outlined target locations and approach vectors for planned attacks. The vacation photos weren't innocent memories. The sequence of locations, the timestamps on the images, and even the colors prominent in each photo created a complex communication system that required no written language at all. "They're not hiding messages in communications," I explained to the Joint Task Force. "They're turning ordinary communications into messages by manipulating the metadata, timing, and contextual elements that most people ignore." This network had developed the most sophisticated communication system I'd ever encountered, one that used the structure and timing of normal online activity to coordinate operations without ever writing anything that could be identified as suspicious content. The investigation that followed revealed a global network that had been operating undetected for years, coordinating through food blogs, academic papers, social media posts, and even online gaming activities. They'd created a communication system so advanced that it looked like normal internet activity to every automated detection system. But they'd made one crucial mistake. Human behavior has patterns, even when people are trying to be random. The timing of their posts, the geographic distribution of their accounts, and the subtle linguistic choices they made when creating innocent content revealed the underlying human intelligence directing the operation. The final operation to dismantle this network took place across 4 continents simultaneously. It was the largest coordinated intelligence operation in modern history, and it prevented what could have been coordinated attacks on critical infrastructure in 12 countries. Afterward, Director Singh offered me a promotion to a position that would have made me one of the youngest division heads in intelligence community history. Instead, I surprised everyone, including myself, by declining. I want to teach, I told her. The techniques we've developed, the analytical methods, the understanding of how communication and deception evolve, other analysts need to learn these skills. 6 months later, I joined the faculty at Georgetown University's Security Studies program, where I teach courses on linguistic intelligence, AI-generated content detection, and advanced communication analysis. My students include current intelligence analysts, military officers, and civilians preparing for national security careers. But the most rewarding part of my new role is the consulting work I do for agencies around the world. When a new type of communication system emerges, when traditional analysis methods fail, when linguistic patterns don't match anything anyone has seen before, that's when they call me. Last month, I helped Japanese intelligence identify a network using ancient poetry forms to coordinate cyber attacks. 3 weeks ago, I worked with European partners to decode messages hidden in online music playlists. Yesterday, I briefed Canadian authorities about a group using mathematical equations in academic papers to plan border infiltration operations. The work continues to evolve, but the core principle remains the same. Human communication always contains patterns, and those patterns can be identified by someone who understands how language, culture, and technology intersect. My family now understands not just what I do, but why it matters. When news breaks about prevented attacks or dismantled networks, they sometimes recognize the linguistic analysis techniques that contributed to the success, even though my specific role is never mentioned publicly. "We're proud of you," my mom said during my last visit home, not because of the medals or the recognition, but because you found work that uses everything you're good at to help people. That's the real story, not the dramatic vindication or the high-level recognition, but the discovery that the most fulfilling career often comes from combining your natural abilities with work that matters to something larger than yourself. Today, when I stand in front of a classroom full of future intelligence analysts, I see the same combination of curiosity and dedication that led me into this field. Some of them will develop new analytical techniques I can't imagine. Others will identify communication patterns that haven't been invented yet. But they'll all learn the fundamental truth that took me years to understand. The most important intelligence work happens not in the dramatic moments that make headlines, but in the quiet, careful analysis of human communication that helps keep the world a little bit safer. And sometimes, the most unbelievable truth is that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they find the right place to use their talents. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.